All right, Sam, let's get into DeAndre Hopkins signing with the Tennessee Titans, a team that, as of a few days ago, I think pretty clearly had the worst receiving situation in the NFL, if, bottom three at best. What does Nuke's addition to the wide receiver room do for this offense?
Yeah, I mean, from Tennessee's perspective, I think it's a great move. The only way you would say that it isn't is if you couch it in the context, which has to linger over this a little bit, of you could have just paid A.J. Brown. Everything you've done since then has been about, oh man, we don't have any wide receivers anymore. We kind of need to fix that. And yeah, you could have just paid the man what he wanted and what he was worth. And you're getting pretty close to that now in terms of the amount of money that they've given up. Like, that's the biggest sort of thing to come from this is it's quite a lot of money for Nuke Hopkins. And in this world of like, will he, how much does he want to ring? How much does he only want to look at contenders? When the rubber meets the road and the contract offers are on the table, ultimately he's going to go where the money is. And that was apparently Tennessee relative to anybody else that he could have gone to. Certainly, the true ring-chasing type teams, Buffalo and Kansas City, were the two that were always talked about. They were just never going to go to this kind of dollar figure. Maybe New England would have, but that's kind of in the same boat as Tennessee of like theoretical contenders. Like, yeah, sure, they could probably get in there, but they're not Buffalo, they're not Tennessee. So this is kind of what happens, I think, that everybody might have these ideals of, yeah, I want to go take less money, go to a contender, chase that championship. But are you going to do that when it means sacrificing for real, like an actual dollar amount? It's easy to say in theory when no money is on the table, but as soon as somebody goes, well, there's 20-something million over here and there's 10 million over here, which one are you going to? How much is your ring chasing actually worth to you?
Yeah, it's been reported as a 2-year, $26 million deal worth up to $32 million in incentives. So it's in between that. He was breaking the scale for a few years up in that 26, 27 million a year range. And it's certainly not that like 1 year, $8 million flyer or anything like that. So it's very much in between those. I think for at least a second, it's fair for you to bring up AJ Brown and to, say, hey, that would have been a better option. We're over a year removed from that decision. So based off of where the Titans are right now, it's an interesting one because, again, they were second year of Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akina, whole bunch of unproven receivers. Chiga Okonkwo, who had a really nice rookie season at tight end. But you're really looking at this group of pass catchers and saying they're going to have some serious issues. They're going to have to rely on just Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill being a game manager. But this does potentially open up the offense a little bit. Hopkins has a history of elevating quarterbacks, much like A.J. Brown has done or did for Ryan Tannehill. I think the other question just becomes, I think from a Hopkins standpoint, he was just going for the money, Sam. He wasn't caring about the situation, the rings, even if, not that the Patriots would have been a better situation, but, he could have maybe pursued the Bills, the Chiefs, and some other contenders at a cheaper price. But he was going with the two teams that were going to potentially pay him some money. So I want to talk about this from a New England perspective too, because they missed out. But from a Titans perspective, is this enough? Like, does Nuke Hopkins have enough left in the tank? We've seen they traded for Julio Jones a couple years ago. He didn't have enough left in the tank. Does Hopkins have enough left in the tank over these last couple years where he was elite just 2 years ago, but the last 2 years not looking as good as he was previously?
Well, I think the biggest thing for Julio was injuries, right? And injuries have started to take their toll on Nuke Hopkins as well. And that's the big kind of question mark of, well, if he's now going to be an injury-prone receiver going forward, then it's a different conversation. But if we assume we're getting a healthy DeAndre Hopkins, then I think his tape shows he absolutely still has juice. And in particular, if you already have somebody that can scare defenses deep, because that's the one area where I think there is sign that he might not be able to do it anymore. You look at his tape, the games where he was actually playing, he can't really run. I mean, he was never a fast receiver anyway, right? He was a guy that ran like a 4.5 something 40 times. So any loss of pace whatsoever is going to basically remove the threat of a go ball from his repertoire, or any go balls that he gets are back shoulder plays, right? They're jump balls. They're just thrown to space and let him go and get the ball. So that threat of like a legitimate deep force, I think, is pretty much off the table now. But in every other area, he's still really good. Like he snaps off routes really quickly. He stops on a dime. He's got great hands. He understands how to play leverage. All those things. Minimum, he's still an excellent possession receiver and gets more effective the more of a viable deep threat you already have in the offense. And I think Treylon Burks has already shown he can be that deep threat. Like, he has the explosiveness, the speed to run off a deep coverage and open up space for Hopkins. So I think in isolation, he fits for pretty much any team in the NFL. And in particular, in combination with Treylon Burks, I think they maximize each other's skill set right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on Hopkins as far as the film goes. Still so good at just getting open against zone, against man coverage. He was never the guy that was going to create a ton of separation, but he could. That was kind of an underrated part of his game, because I think we all remember him making those spectacular catches all the time. He still has that in his repertoire. We saw the one-handed touchdown. He had it for Kyler Murray last year in the red zone. He still has all of that, but he could separate well enough. So I'm with you. Short, intermediate. Hopkins can do some damage. He was kind of sneaky good after the catch in Arizona compared to what he was in Houston. They used him on some shorter routes, and he could, create just a little bit, even though that's not the best part of his game. So I don't expect a Julio Jones type of situation. I brought it up just for comparison.
Right.
I expect a guy that's still productive. Also a guy that just gives the quarterback somebody, hey, they're playing man coverage, just throw it up to him, right? You don't have to rely on Treylon Burks, Westbrook-Akina, the other guys to just, create separation all the time. You have a throw it up type of option, and I think Nuke can still do that. So I think it helps Tennessee. It's also interesting that we viewed Tennessee as in this competitive rebuild mode the entire offseason. They were cutting salary. They cut, Robert Woods and Ben Jones at center. They're cutting players left and right. And then now they're putting money into Nuke Hopkins. We thought maybe, hey, they're bringing in Will Levis in the second round. They're looking to the future, but this is still Ryan Tannehill playing under center, handing the ball to Derrick Henry, running play action. And they also don't. This is the type of team that doesn't necessarily need three receivers. If it's Hopkins and Treylon Burks and Chigakwakwo at tight end, it's kind of how the offense wants to operate. So I think Tennessee, all of a sudden, just by one player, is actually a lot more competitive than they looked just 4 days ago.
Yeah, and you also have to bear in mind with Tennessee is that they're generally better than the sum of their parts. They're better than they look on paper just perpetually. Like the Mike Vrabel effect, the fact that this team seems to constantly overperform. Like, we're looking at this team, we're like looking at all the flaws and saying, on paper, they're certainly nowhere near the class of the AFC, the Buffaloes, the Cincinnatis, the Kansas Cities. They're not in that class, but they're in a much easier division than that. And if you're looking at this team and saying, is it inconceivable that they match pace with Jacksonville and could still make the playoffs? And, at that point, all bets are off. Like, the way they play football is a problem for any of those teams once it gets to January and those kinds of games. Like, it's not at all inconceivable that this team is simply better than most people were giving them credit for. And the single biggest problem with the team was wide receiver. So if you go and get a DeAndre Hopkins, spend a bit of money there, and look, I think it's fine to sort of point out the folly of, maybe you should have just paid A.J. Brown. But also, that's done now, right? There's no fixing that. So with that already part of the status quo, now you need to fix that mistake. And the best way of fixing that mistake is to go and get a legitimate top-end receiver to go with a guy like Treylon Burks rather than hoping that he takes this, giant leap forward in year two. Hopkins can seriously move the needle for this team and transform them immediately back into contenders within that division. And, whoever wins that division is going to be an underdog once they get to the playoffs, simply given the nature of the other teams in the AFC. But, all you got to do is get there. And then it's just a case of stringing together the right sequence of games.